Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Tammy Letherer, and she's here today to share with us her new book, The Buddha at My Table: How I Found Peace in Betrayal and Divorce. So how do you move forward when everything is crashing down around you? Tammy's husband of 12 years had just put their children to bed, and this is right before Christmas. He had a piece of paper in his hand, and as he read from the list in his hand, his next words would shatter her world and destroy every assumption she ever made about love, friendship, and faithfulness. So many of you know Tammy. She's a writing coach, blogger, and author. She lives in Chicago with her 3 children and enjoys yoga, swing dancing, reading a good novel, gray Earl tea, and spending time outdoors. You can read her blog about creativity, spirituality, and the writing life on Huffington Post. So let's welcome to the show, Tammy Letherer.
Thanks for having me.
It's such an honor to have you here, Tammy, and to talk about your new book. I mean, I've got to ask you, there's so much here. Why did you decide now was the right time to write this book?
Well, strangely enough, I knew very, very quickly when my life sort of fell apart. I didn't see that coming, but very quickly into the process, I had a sense that I needed to start journaling everything and that it would become a book. I guess mostly I think, and anyone who has been in this situation may relate to this, there was this feeling of, this can't be happening. This can't be happening to me. But because it was happening, I had a sense of, there must be a reason for it. So, I had been journaling already for quite some time, but not at that particular moment. I had done it in the past, but I picked up my journal right away and started recording things, and even had a sense very early on that it had to be a book because I just couldn't make it up.
Yeah, it's really a heartfelt read. And I think a lot of people can relate. One of the things I was really surprised about is the number of breakups and divorces happening right now because of the pandemic.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, that's probably a very unique situation. I would think, being in sort of a crucible situation, almost where everything is magnified and problems come to light sooner, maybe that you had ignored in the past. It's got to be a tough time to go through a divorce. But I was just speaking with someone the other day in an interview and talking about on the positive side of divorcing during pandemic life. I think has to be that the pandemic really has distilled everything down to what's important to us, right? The priorities. And so I think that, yes, it might be tougher to go through it with these other challenges, but it also can strip away some of the things that tend to get us reactionary or that we fight about, the things that eventually you look back and realize those things didn't matter. Those didn't make sense, but in the time, as it's happening in the moment, you're so emotional that you cling to those things. And I think the pandemic can help to strip some of that away. And that's a positive side of it.
Well, why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about your story? Because I know you were married for 12 years with your husband, Dave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had 3 children. We'd actually been together closer to 20 years, married almost 13. And, I believed happily married, and the thought never crossed my mind that it would be otherwise. And he called me to the table one night after putting the kids to bed and had a piece of paper in front of him and said he had 3 things to tell me, and told me this news about, I have been unfaithful since the beginning of our marriage. He admitted, said that he had met somebody that he was planning to be with, wanted to leave our marriage, somebody that he had known for just a couple of weeks. And he said he wanted to wrap everything up between he and I in about a month. So it was
Wow.
being delivered, being sort of handed all of this shocking information, not just the content of it, but also sort of these timelines, and trying to get my head around, wait, when had this happened? This is, he started this behavior 10 years prior, before we even had children. So that was a shock. And then trying to get my head around you know, um, the meeting someone so quickly and making such a huge decision based on, what seemed to me, an acquaintance, or someone who's barely more than a stranger. And then, of course, the final blow was telling me that we needed to wrap things up as if we were in some business arrangement, or, it just was so out of the blue and shocking to me, and so unfeeling and unrealistic too. So that was the hardest part for me. It was I mean, in my book I described that in that opening scene, I do fall to the floor. I slide off my chair and go down on the floor because it just felt that devastating. And, that was obviously a low point. And the good part, though, in that, and I like to go on from there and talk a lot about this in the book, is, those moments. We all have sort of those bathroom floor moments. And I refer to it that way because that's how Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book, Eat, Pray, Love, she talks about her bathroom floor moment. And I thought, well, I had my dining room floor moment where I slid to the floor in the dining room. But we all have those moments, I think, occasionally, where our life feels like that. Whether we physically fall to the floor or not, we can feel really knocked off of our feet. And so, there has to be something after that follows, that gets us up. For me, I thought, well, what is it that got me up off the floor? And just becoming curious about that, and really thinking, there was something bigger than me that made me keep going. And I just really clung to that as the whole process evolved.
I know there's so much more to that story, and we're not going to cover it all, but I can completely understand. I think a lot of people resonate with your story because divorce gets messy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, again, trying to reframe a little bit. And I know this is hard, when I don't mean to make light of it. When you're in the moment and you do feel shocked, it's hard to think, well, how do I step outside of myself? But I do believe there is sort of a blessing in those shocking moments, because time stands still in a way when you're in that. And when time stands still, within that is this blessing that, you can't look forward, you can't look back. You really don't have the ability to. So the present moment becomes all that you have. And so I think that's the gift. And, certainly I'm not the first to kind of think about it in those terms, or experience it that way. But we talk about the gift of the present. And sometimes it takes getting knocked down to fully be in the present. And maybe that's because you literally can't do anything else than just be in the present. That's all you can handle. But even in that moment, there are things to get you through. And I found that for myself early on. It was just very little things, moment to moment, that got me through. And, looking back, you think, oh, well, that's just so trivial, whether it's a cup of tea, with a friend, whether it was my friend coming and putting a blanket around my shoulders, whether it was another friend sending me a song, that meant a lot to her, that had gotten her through, just these little stepping stones that are so important. And I think when you can be present to what's happening, even when it's painful, that's when those things become obvious.
I know you talk on, how we can turn our ultimate betrayal into ultimate blessing. It's interesting because it is a shift in perspective to look for that silver lining and for another way to reframe it, as you talk about. Was it really difficult to do that during the time you're experiencing all of this? And do you find it easier now?
Yes, it was difficult. Although I have to say, it wasn't impossible. And if you had asked me before any of this had happened, if you were to ever go through something like this, I think in my mind I would have really built it up to be an impossible task. And that's not what I found as it was unfolding. And that's the part that I think, to your earlier question, knowing when it would become a book, or if I was going to write about it, that's the part that intrigued me the most and made me know that it was something bigger that I did want to write about, or that I knew eventually would become something to be shared, a story to be shared, because it in those moments there was always something to get me through, and I was really amazed by that. So it was difficult for sure, but it wasn't impossible. And like I said, when I look back, I could see a certain grace happening. And as I did get stronger, and it happened pretty quickly, that I made the decision to look through a lens of, how is this happening for me? How can I put aside that idea that life is so unfair and this is all happening to me, and I'm at the mercy of everything? How can I imagine that it's a gift? Because what if it is? Just imagining, what if it is a gift? And I found just asking that question opened up a little bit of space and did allow me to see things differently. And now, of course, many years later, looking back, I see that that's absolutely the case. That I can even see ways that I maybe sort of called this in, to myself. As I said, I was completely unknowing of the situation. I would never have said I wanted it, but I can also look back and see that I wasn't really living my best life. I wasn't being the person I wanted to be. I wasn't really putting myself first in any way. So, what a blessing that's been, to just discover, myself.
It must have been so empowering not to worry about what other people were thinking about you. At the same time, it must have been really difficult. One day you're married, you've been married for 12 years, and the next day you're a single mom. How did you transition with that?
Well, I got a lot of support. I sort of circled the wagons and gathered my team as quickly as I could. And I had a couple of good friends that I could rely on. I had one friend and neighbor in particular who was just a real sort of mentor for me and helped walk me through. And just the little things, like I said from the beginning, saying, hey, have you called your therapist? Do you need to talk to your doctor? Do you need to maybe get, sleeping pills short term, or anything like physically? What do you need physically right now to get through, to be able to take care of the kids? She came over and helped rearrange the bedroom and move my husband's things out. And she put flowers and pictures of my kids on the bedside table. Just little things like that felt really touching. And again, opened my eyes to some connections that maybe I had taken for granted, and just such gratitude for those people, those friends, who did open their hearts to me, as I'm suffering, and shared some things about themselves. I mean, I had moments with friends that I don't think I ever would have had this not happened. And so I think really, getting that support system in place. Um, Self-care is, I'm queen of self-care. And I put it before all other things. And so I was getting some energy healing treatments once a week, and I'd see my therapist, and um, just, getting out, taking walks, going to yoga, just anything I could do to make sure that I was as healthy as I could be. I think that made all the difference in being able to deal with my kids, and to be there in the way that I wanted to be. And it wasn't always possible. There were times when I was pretty out of it, physically sick in the beginning, and there were times I cried, and I tried to be as genuine as I could with my kids, but also, of course, I didn't want to scare them or burden them. So it's a fine line. But I think the more that you can take care of yourself, just the better off everyone's going to be.
Was it really difficult to have boundaries and just determine what those boundaries are with your ex? Was that a really difficult thing to do?
That was really tough. um, it was really tough because we had, as I learned very quickly and came to learn, our relationship had been one that he was pretty controlling in a lot of ways that I hadn't realized. And so yeah, we did have to establish some ground rules, and we did that with the help of a therapist. We did go pretty quickly in the beginning to a therapist as a couple. We just went for, a few visits, but she was helpful in setting up those practical matters. And she said right from the start, what are your ground rules? Start with a parenting schedule. You need to start acting right now as if you are splitting and start working towards separation. There's no reason to prolong it. And so things like, who gets the kids on what days, even though we were still living together and he wouldn't move out actually for quite a few months. We did establish right off the beginning who's in charge when, just to move toward that, knowing that that was what was coming. So that was important. And I made sure that, in the beginning that I would go out on my so-called nights off. I think I had Wednesday nights. That was my night, and it was tough. And looking back, I feel embarrassed almost to think of this, that I had such a hard time thinking, what do I do with myself? And I remember going to Target and just wandering around Target and thinking, well, do I need to buy the kids anything? And, or should I go to a coffee shop? And it was shocking in a way. I mean, looking back, that I didn't have that muscle developed at all of how to be with myself and how to really know, what is it I like? What do I want to do? Who am I when I'm not being a mom or a wife? And so that was a a learning curve that I had to go through. But setting up that system from the beginning was very helpful, just to get me to start thinking in terms of, okay, who am I? This is my time. I need to go out and do something. And of course, we had to set up financial boundaries and work on budgeting and things like that. So there were a lot of practical considerations, but I think probably the most important boundary really was emotional, and realizing that, I was not going to be treated as a wife anymore in terms of, him coming to me for advice or emotional support or wanting sympathy from me. And that was really hard to turn that off and to switch into a business relationship. So I did it by asking that we either text or use email so that I could take time to respond before I didn't want to be reactive or emotional. And I knew I would be if we spoke directly. So we really separated things quickly into as much of a business relationship as possible. And that helped me quite a bit.
That must have been so difficult having him live in the house after all of that.
Yeah, it stretched into much longer than I anticipated. And I had mixed feelings because on the one hand, I felt like, wow, we've been together for so long. Once he leaves, it's final. It's real. I'm alone. And I was very scared. I was just petrified of that and what it would look like. And could I handle the kids on my own and all of those things? But then on the flip side, it was emotionally very confusing. It was, draining, exhausting, frustrating having him there. And he had apparently gotten advice early on, I think from his lawyer, who somehow he had the belief that if he were to move out, he wouldn't get any visitation. And so he dug his heels in and ended up staying for 8 months in the basement, which wasn't like a separate finished off basement. It was just, he slept down there, but we still shared the kitchen and everything. And it was tough. It was tough to have, one foot in both worlds. But yeah, it finally worked out. Finally, a judge stepped in and said, "Yeah, you need to leave. It's time to actually act as if you are divorced, and live separate lives." And so, finally, that order came through, and it did help things a lot.
That must have been such a huge relief to have him move out so that you can start creating how your family is going to move forward.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's scary to think about what is the unknown? What's the new life going to look like? But you find out, you sort of put one step in front of the other and blindly move forward. And I think that's the key. Just move forward. Just, you don't have to have it all figured out, but just take those steps to start separating each other, from each other, and in small ways. Even I remember I went and leased a car. We had one minivan, just sort of the typical family with three kids. And I thought, well, I need my own car. And I went with my friend and my mom, and we picked out a used car from CarMax, and I came home with it, and he just seemed outraged that I was getting my own car and that I hadn't consulted him, and just seemed shocked, in fact, that I had made this move on my own. And I thought, well, we are divorcing, I will eventually have to have my own life and, my own place to live and car and things like that. So yeah, it's a strange dynamic and mindset, I think, especially when you've been with someone for so long. And if you don't see it coming, it can be hard to make these adjustments, these mental adjustments. But it all works out. You learn, you move ahead, you find wonderful opportunities where you don't expect them. And so, I think it's tough, but there's always something better lying ahead. I just have to believe that.
Well, let's talk about self-discovery for a little bit. I mean, how did you determine the things you like, you don't like? Just getting to this point where you're kind of saying, hey, this is what I'm all about, and getting to that authentic self.
Yeah, I think it began early on with me getting together with friends who had known me, my whole life, some very, college friends, girlfriend I had grown up with, and just really settling into this sense of, they know me. They know who I was before, and I'm still that person, even if I don't recognize that old person, as much, or I've maybe lost my way. And just sitting with that and thinking, what did I like to do? What do I like to do? What would be blue sky thinking if I could imagine anything? And so of course, I've always been a writer. I had written a novel before all of this happened. I had just finished it, actually, and then life sort of handed me this next book, and I thought, well, I've got this now. And it took me 13 years to write my first novel, and I did it in between taking care of three kids, having three kids, taking care of them. My husband and I arranged that I would have 2 hours on Saturday to go to the coffee shop, and I just felt like, oh, I feel so guilty even taking 2 hours away. And so this time around, I thought, no, this is what I'm here to do. I know I want to write books. I had always been a writer and always known I'd wanted to be a writer since I was very little. And so I committed to that, first and foremost. Like, if life is handing me this, then I'm going to take it seriously, and I'm going to do this. This is my goal. I'm going to write this book. And I did other things that sounded like fun. I had always loved to dance, never really taken dance lessons, and I had a girlfriend who did ballroom dancing, and I started going with her to classes, and I got really into it. And I would go by myself to classes and to open dances, and I was scared to death. I had to really push through and get over that feeling of awkwardness and learning something new and looking like a fool, and all of those things. But I'm really glad I did. I kept up with that, and made myself go. And I would have a rule that if I went to a dance, I had to do 3 dances, and then I could leave if I wanted to. But dancing with different people, and it really was wonderful. I mean, I really felt like I found my joy just in learning to dance and going out and dancing, and even doing it, going by myself and just go dance with a couple people and then leave. And so that was one thing that felt really good. But I think it is important to stop and think, what would you like to do? And how, no matter how crazy it sounds, or how much you've pushed it away for how many years, you can always come back to those old interests.
I really have to applaud you. The courage that you show going out and trying new things and going beyond your comfort zone. I mean, so many people don't do that. And I think it shows a lot for your children too. I'm sure they're learning a lot about that. But also to not allow this experience to make you bitter. A lot of times people will use experiences like this to stay in that state. While we might be upset and happy initially, but that staying in that bitterness is not where we want to be.
Yes. Well, and I have experienced that because my parents divorced when I was 16. And I think, for the remainder of my dad's life, and my parents, well, my dad would have been in his 70s, my mom as well. I don't think they ever said a kind word about each other, and it was so much bitterness, and it's so corrosive. I did not want that for myself, for my kids, especially for my kids.
How did the children, react through all this? It must have been really tough for them.
It was tough. They took it. It was interesting. They took it. My oldest, who was about 7, took it, you know, pretty hard initially, but he seemed to make sense of it very quickly. And I remember he came into the kitchen one morning at breakfast and he said, "Mom, I know why you and Dad are divorcing." And I said, "Oh, really?" He said, "Yeah, because of the economy." Don't know where he got that, but it seemed to cheer him up. And also, I think, going back to being honest and open with the kids, the therapist had given us advice from the beginning to answer their questions honestly, but don't overload them with information. So if they have a question, answer it, but they don't really need to know very much. Kids just want to know sort of the basics just as it relates to them. And so that was good advice. And I would say things like, Dad is sleeping downstairs right now because Dad and I aren't getting along very well, but we're working it out and it's okay. Just very simple things like that. And that really did satisfy the kids. So I think, as they get older, they have different questions that come up. But I would always come back to, if it was something that they could ask their dad, I say, I think you should talk to your dad about that, and try to keep my stuff separate from his. And then, in other cases, I would say, well, this is how I felt. This was my experience, but that doesn't mean it's your experience. And you can have your own experience, and you will always have your dad, and your dad is your dad, and you'll have your own relationship. And just because my relationship with him changes doesn't mean yours has to. So we just kept that as the basic message. And I think that helped the kids quite a bit.
What a great way to handle that. I think a lot of people either give too much information and share too much or say negative things, or they just don't know what to say.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Or they, use their kids to make themselves feel better. And I don't say that with judgment because I know there were times I did that. My oldest son, like I said, he was 7 when this all began. He just has always had such a wise soul. And I feel like he's got this ancient wisdom encoded in him. And I think there were times that I, maybe said a few things or just mused out loud about the situation. And I look back and think, oh, did I put too much on his shoulders? But I'll tell you, there's a couple of these in the book situations that I describe where he would just say the wisest thing to me, and it just would really carry me through. So I think again, there's that balance of not overloading your children. That's why I think having that support system, having your friends that you go to and talk to, people you can trust who aren't going to over dramatize things or work you up or get you, make you be reactive, but they're going to be calming influences. It's great to have those. And that way I think you won't overload on your kids, but it's not to say you can't be honest about what you're feeling.
Well, it sounds like that's a great approach in handling that. My goodness, Tammy, we could talk for hours. I really enjoyed reading your book, The Buddha at My Table. Where can our listeners connect with you, learn about your book, and be part of your community?
Oh, I would love that. Yeah, I can be found on my website, which is tammyletherer.com. My book is available, just recently came out in audiobook. So you can find it on Audible and really any other outlet that carries Audible or audio books. Of course, it's on Amazon, in bookstores. Yeah, visit me at my website. I have a newsletter sign up. I send out blogs occasionally. I like to write about, just inspiration, creativity, writing. I like to write about writing. I work as a writing coach as well. I love to help other people tell their stories, and I work with people, especially who are writing memoir. So if that's something that anyone wants to do, I'd love to be a resource for that. But definitely stop by my website. I think that's a great place to start.
Well, Tammy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Tammy. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Buddha at My Table. The Buddha at My Table is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.